I want to welcome Mr. John McCarthy, Secretary General of the Department of the Environment, Community and Local Government. Can I ask you to introduce your officials, please?
Thank you, Chairman. This morning, just to my right, I'm accompanied by Barbara McGain, Assistant Secretary in our Housing Division, and Lisa Clifford, also from the Housing Division. And to my left, I have Maria Graham, the Assistant Secretary in the Water Division, Barry Ryan from Water Services, and behind is Maurice Coughlin, our Finance Officer.
Mr. Head, Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. I'll ask the CNAG now to make his opening statement, please.
As the committee is aware, Irish Water took on responsibility for water services from the local authorities with effect from 1 January 2014. It also took over all the assets and liabilities related to the authority's water supply and discharge business. The legal transfer of contractual obligations to Irish Water from the local authorities was effected on the 21st of February 2014 and the 25th of April 2014 under orders made by the Minister for the Environment, Community and Local Government. Prior to the establishment of Irish Water, the Department provided funding to water services authorities for the provision of major water and wastewater schemes to meet key environmental and economic objectives. Departmental expenditure under the Water Services Programme was €241 million in 2013, and the total cost of the programme from 2007 to 2013 was €2.9 billion. In the 2012 appropriation account for the vote, the Department recorded that it had outstanding capital commitments to local authorities to provide a total of €340 million in respect of local authority water services projects. The disclosure of such commitments is required under the standard accounting policies for appropriation accounts. The Department did not include any capital commitments that existed as at end December 2013 in regard to the Water Services Investment Programme in the Department's appropriation account for 2013 on the basis that they became the responsibility of Irish Water in 2014.
Chairman, as the committee is aware, water sector reform has been an area of intense activity in the Department over the last 2 years. The first part of Chapter 7 of the Controller's report gives a summary of some aspects of implementation of the reform programme. Since 1 January 2014, Irish Water has had statutory responsibility for all aspects of water services planning, delivery and operation at national, regional and local levels, including responsibility for the delivery of capital infrastructure. The progression of water services capital projects is now a matter for Irish Water. Up until the transfer of responsibility for water services to Irish Water at the beginning of 2014, local authorities were responsible for the delivery of water services capital infrastructure, and funding was provided by the Department under the Water Services Investment Programme. The final programme administered by the Department ran from 2010 to the end of 2013. And under that programme, a total of 294 major contracts were completed, comprising 176 water supply projects, including 75 water conservation projects, and 118 wastewater projects. On taking over responsibility for the delivery of water services, Irish Water published a capital investment plan for the period 2014 to 2016. The plan outlines the indicative investment priorities in water services infrastructure over the 3-year period. It consists of a targeted programme of over 386 individual projects and a range of sub-programmes, which will deliver improvements in drinking water quality, leakage reduction, wastewater compliance, business efficiencies and customer service.
But just one question on Irish Water with regards to the statutory responsibilities have been transferred to Irish Water, is that correct?
That's true, yeah.
And what about the accountability responsibilities?
In terms of accountability, Irish Water is accountable to the Minister for under a number of headings, not least in relation to the requirement to have its annual report and to have its accounts audited and to present them to the Minister and have them laid before the Houses of the Oireachtas. And the Irish Water is obviously accountable to the Joint Oireachtas Committee, and I understand that there are plans for Irish Water to come into the committee in the coming weeks. Irish Water is accountable in a very, very important way for all of its expenditure to the Commission on Energy Regulation.
Are you the accounting officer for Irish Water?
I'm the accounting officer for exchequer funding that passes through the voter, through the local government fund to Irish Water.
Right, that's because people are confused with statutory responsibility and accountability responsibility. You know, while statutory responsibility is one job, and we know the statutory responsibility they have, but the fact that there's 1.3 billion, you know, if you take the projection up to 2016 when the department with the subvention and all of the payments from the National Pension Reserve Fund and the loans that's capped from the capital contributions, it's a lot of money. So that, in effect, you know, it's a very distinct difference between, you know, who actually would say that when it comes to the Controller and Auditor General, obviously that, I mean, he will be doing the audit in Irish Water, but we'd say that when it comes to the difficulties, are you the accounting officer until 2016 with Irish Water?
I will be the accounting officer for expenditure that goes to Irish Water through the local government fund or through the vote. Irish Water is outside the remit of the Controller and Auditor General, and that issue was raised again in the course of legislation just before Christmas, and the policy position that was taken by the Minister was that those arrangements should remain as is, primarily taking account of the extent to which Irish Water is accountable to the Joint Oireachtas Committee, but fundamentally because all of Irish Water's expenditure is subject to approval by the Commission for Energy Regulation. And of course, from an environmental point of view, Irish Water is accountable to the EPA.
Just a final question, just with regards to see that who takes I see they're allowed to borrow from other sources. We see that who signs the state guarantee? Is it the department that's ultimately responsible for that? Who take the
there is no guarantee there's no state guarantee in relation to Irish Water's borrowings, Deputy. There are borrowing consents where the Minister has to give consent to borrowing, but there is no state guarantee attaching to it. Other than in relation to the NPRF, because an element of that was associated or was drawn down before functions actually formally transferred over to Irish.
I just want to ask the Controller, just with regards to the 1.3 billion in the Controller, with regards to the statutory responsibility and the accountability responsibility, what's your opinion on that?
Well, Deputy, I'm not the auditor of Irish Water, as the Secretary-General has said. It's a policy decision, a policy matter, and I can't really comment on it. I would say that the arrangement in relation to Irish Water is the standard arrangement that is in place in relation to all other utilities and commercial state bodies, so like ESB, Bord Gáis, and so on.
Yeah, but it's what the Controller or the Secretary-General, I think that with regards to the 1.3 billion from your department for the voter estimate, you will be very much tracking how that is spent, obviously.
Well, I think the 1.3 billion is the capital investment. Is that the figure that you're talking about?
The subvention over the number of years coming from your department.
Oh, the subvention, yes, yeah. And in effect, that subvention is in effect a resource that is being provided by the public purse to subvent the cost of producing water and providing wastewater services, and that those costs themselves will have initially been approved by the Commission for Energy Regulation.
Secretary, thank you.
I think just in relation to the point made by Deputy Perry, while that may be the case with all utilities, as the Controller and Auditor General has said, there is an opinion which I share that Irish Water should come under the Public Accounts Committee and the Controller and Auditor General, and I think it's a flaw in the legislation that it was allowed to pass without being put under the control of the CNAG. And I think that we learn to regret that in future years, particularly when you're accounting for the vast amounts of taxpayers' money that have gone into the system. You were asking about the PPP contracts and the
That's
design,
in addition
build
to these assets,
and operate.
Yeah.
Right. What I'm trying to establish here is, you're then saying that you transferred these at a time. These have been transferred already.
All of the contracts which local authorities would have had, operational, design build, or construction contracts or engineering consultants, they transferred.
What value? When you
they
say
were part of
transfer,
they transferred and became the responsibility of Irish Water to then pay those contractors.
So
So they're part of the
what was that
ongoing
figure?
operational
Is that the
costs.
figure?
Yeah, well, that's one of the figures. So the Minister signed
What
that
was that figure?
statutory
I
instrument.
don't have a figure.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, the Minister signed that statutory instrument last year for
He did,
Will give us the value of what was transferred under that statutory instrument on a local authority by local authority
Yes,
basis.
I don't, we can get
And-
that figure.
Sorry.
And that's only part of the
And
transfer.
I just want to
Yeah.
clarify this. So Deputy Fleming is asking you for that figure
Yes.
of what has been transferred. And are you saying that you just don't have that figure today, or are you saying that that figure has to be assessed or something?
That figure was a figure within Irish Water. It is part of the operational costs of local authorities that moved to Irish Water. So it was and part of the capital programmes that moved to Irish Water. So the statutory instrument included both things. They were live contracts that moved
But
from
does
the
it include the
responsibility.
figures?
I think
Where are the figures?
the committed capital expenditure on, if you like, capital projects, ongoing construction projects that transferred to Irish Water came to about 424 million euros.
Figure Deputy Fleming is
No, 420.
That's the capital. That's
Where the PPs transferred as part
Yeah.
of
No,
that.
it was good to say, just drawing a distinction between the if you like, the projects under construction and the projects at operation.
Yeah.
If you take the projects either under construction or otherwise capitally committed,
Yeah.
the value of those in total came to 424 million. And what my colleague is saying is in relation to the operational contracts, because the liabilities in relation to those operation contracts are in the local authority accounts, we will need to just pull those together to get you that figure.
So the Department of the Environment are telling us here today, you don't know the value of the PPP contracts that are being transferred from the local authorities to Irish Water.
What I said, and know that the amount that has to be, that on an annual basis is 124 million.
fine.
The data that you asked me to get that I don't have is if you project that forward in terms of the life of those
There's no
DBOs.
projection for it. It's written into the PPP contract at the beginning. There's no projection. There's
Well,
a
there-
figure in the PPP contract.
There is,
Day
but
one.
there is, but we were not responsible for the operation of the DBO contracts. So the data and the due diligence on this was passed from local authorities directly to Irish Water. So that's where we've undertaken.
Facilitated by the statutory instrument by the Minister.
The power under the Act was to transfer the liabilities from one to the other and to transfer the assets on an ongoing basis.
Will it take you long to get that information on the PPPs?
I don't imagine it should.
Okay.
I imagine-
That figure then that we're talking about here, that you don't have because it was a transfer directly to the local authority, Irish Water, can be obtained by a phone call to Irish Water.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And that figure will give us the breakdown in every single local authority area.
Contract by contract. They're separate contracts. The
Yeah, well,
PPPs
we-
there-
are
there-
separate.
there must be.
We would have put it in that moment, yeah.
So therefore, that figure could be given to us within early next week. Because it's a figure that you have to have.
It should be there. That process is completed, the transfer of those.
Oh, the transfer is done, yes, yeah.
The department has given a subvention to Irish Water in 2014 of 439 million, 399 million in this year, 2015, 479 million next year. Given that, and then in addition to that, there are payments directly from central fund. We'll add it all up. In other words, between the payments, the department subvention from 2014 to 2016 and the loans provided by the National Pension Reserve Fund and the direct contribution from the central fund through the Department of Finance, the transfer to Irish Water will be 2.415 billion by the end of 2016, not to mention future subventions that seem to be built into the system.
If you set out in 2014 to, if you like, buy the different allowances by government that are being granted and passed on by Irish Water, how did you factor into that figure the difference between what the government set out to do and where they actually arrived at because they changed the goalposts in the process? So you have a greater buyout now, have you not, of all of those allowances that have to be granted by Irish Water. The business model for Irish Water, if you like, has changed substantially from a business model that was to collect a greater degree of water charges based on metering to a lesser amount based on a set amount. So how do you establish these figures? And then the question of Deputy Fleming, if you would factor that into it and give us an overall response.
The implications of the change announced late last year were twofold. One, the implication of the rates and taking out the 59 million that would otherwise have been part of Irish Water's operational costs, and the second piece was 21 million was the additional cost to be made up by subvention from the Exchequer through the local government fund, as distinct from coming from user charges. So the user charges figure went down from, I think, 292 million to 271 million, and the subvention went up by a comparable amount.
Okay, I just want to clarify a point raised in relation to the subvention. So let's say the figure for subventions over 14, 15 and 16, as outlined there. What mechanism is in place to audit how that's dealt with once you pay it over? You say that you're buying the allowances, if you like, that are being given by Irish Water. How do you quantify that? Do you get a list of households, names, addresses, PPS numbers?
Well, it would be based on the initial work that's undertaken by the Commission for Energy Regulation in relation to the overall allowed expenditure.
No. You are going to give Irish Water in 14, 439 million, in 15, 399 million. On what is that based? How do you quantify? Do you get an invoice for it?
As the Secretary
And does that invoice set out in detail how you arrived at the figure for the subvention?
Clearly, obviously, because the charging only begins from the 1st of January, the first set of invoices will on that basis, will be during 2015. So it will be split across the different amounts with a number of households by the level of subvention. On an ongoing basis, obviously, the Commission for Energy Regulation is looking at data from Irish Water and getting reports from them similarly, and has been asked specifically by the Minister to look at consumption information and in, for example, like the child's allowance, to ensure that that is at the appropriate level. So there'll be a combination of materials available to the department to check those invoices as we get them.
So that's for 2015?
Yeah.
So your guesstimate for 2014 is 439 million?
2014 was based on, it essentially was the equivalent to the costs that would have arisen in local authorities. That's where that calculation had come from, because no domestic charging had yet been introduced.
So you just took that figure and you
took
paid
it.
it to Irish Water?
We got information on their ongoing, the operational costs, etc., and we get on an ongoing basis considerable financial information in terms of cash flow forecasts and other elements that you would be required across the range of measures we
That subvention dropped down in 2015 and it goes back up again in 2016 from 399 to 479 million. How did you estimate those figures?
Well, as the Secretary-General said, the first step in this is that the energy regulator looks over the period 2015-2016 and says what is the allowed revenue for Irish Water, what the cost should be, and what can they ask of customers. One of the customers is government, which is buying water on behalf of the domestic sector. That's against the production costs of Irish Water, which is a reflection of their operational costs and also the capital programme. So as the so the subvention in the year reflects the fact that capital programme is increasing.
Yeah, but
over time.
you arrived at this figure in your department of 399 and 479. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And what were those figures based on? Were they based on information from
Based
the
on
regulator, the local authorities?
Yes, they were based on the allowed revenue that the SER had published on the
Okay.
30th of September.
Now-
I'm working back from that, taking out what the domestic income would be and taking out what the non-domestic income would be, and then the balance is what government is purchasing.
And for that, you're saying you have, is this where you have the letter in place with them?
Yes.
Or does that relate to the capital?
The letter relates, the letter is being finalised at the moment. It will set out the headings and the reporting that is required of Irish Water.
For the subvention.
For the subvention.
For the subvention. And your expectations letter, that will set out further detail.
That's on behalf of the shareholder. So that is the overall expectation of the shareholder, which is obviously the Minister and the Minister of Finance. Other commercial semi-states have got these letters, and it sets out just the general policy position that
And what is the legal status of both the funding letter and the expectation letter? I think I want you to be my bank manager. It's that simple enough, isn't it? What is the status of both of these letters?
Well, ultimately, the company is responsible to the shareholder. There are a number of elements of that are reflected in statute. And the status of the funding level, that's the basis on which we are giving them the funding and on the basis of which we will be accounting for the funds that are given under the funding letter.
It's really a part of the statutory process of accountability that is provided for in the legislation between the Minister and...
To go to the loans, there is a loan of 250 million 2013, a loan of 50 million in 2014. What's the interest rate on the loan?
I think the interest on that loan is being rolled up and will be payable at the I don't have the rate, Chairman. I do have the rolled up amount somewhere, and I can give that to you. The interest is being rolled up to the end of the current period of that loan, which is to the end of September.
And you'll get that loan of 300 million paid back with interest at the end of...
Its current term is to the end of September. The whole issue of how that is refinanced, that's for Irish Water to deal with as part of its investment.
You'll get your money back with interest at the end of
The NPRF, it's gone from the NPRF on commercial terms, so the NPRF is the other party on that loan.
Okay. The next question in relation to central funding is the capital contribution. So you're making capital contributions on top of all of this in 14, 15 and 16 of 185 million, 222 million, 184 million. Are they going to give you that money back? Is that redeemable in some way?
That is, I mean, when you look to the longer term, what we're endeavouring to achieve with the water reform programme is to get Irish Water to a situation where it funds capital investment from sources other than public investment. That is obviously going to be a transitional process, and the Irish Water at the moment is at an advanced stage in preparing a business plan for the period to 2021, which will look at its investment profile, its financing profile, and its most importantly its operational efficiencies. So those amounts are in effect for capital investment, but you would expect over time that those amounts should scale back according as Irish Water is increasingly sourcing finance from external parties.
But this is taxpayers' money.
Yes.
And what you're saying is that you have an expectation. Have you not got an end date so the taxpayer can feel there is now something definite here. The taxpayer is getting back the money, 300 million euro of a loan plus interest, by the end of September. Can you tell us the capital contribution, is that redeemable? And do you envisage paying that beyond 2016?
I think the capital contribution would, the expectation, this will be set out more clearly in the business plan when it's finalised shortly, but the expectation would be that the capital contribution from public finances would continue for a period after 2016, but the expectation would be that it should be on a downward curve, while the borrowing from private sources is on an upward curve.
It should be. The 54 million convertible loan, what's that?
The 54 million convertible loan is, at this stage, it is a loan, but it could be converted into a capital contribution, depending as the financing strategy evolves. But as things stand right now, it is a loan, but could convert to a capital contribution.
I have never seen as many flexible headings and amounts appear in accounts. So the loan could be paid back by September. The other convertible loan could become something else. The 439 million and so on of local government fund could continue beyond 2016. You're then telling me that when the business plan is complete, what business plan?
Irish Water is currently is required to prepare a business plan for the period to 2022.
But have you a business plan?
In relation to?
In relation to the 2.4 billion euro of taxpayers' money that is going into Irish Water, do you have an overall business plan?
What we have at this point in time is we have a fully assessed expenditure situation as far as Irish Water is concerned through the regulator. The regulator has looked at all of the expenditure for Irish Water to the period to the end of 2016. They will then move into, in early 2016, they will move into a process to look at the next regulatory period, which will be for 5 years, up to the end of 2021. In anticipation of that, Irish Water is preparing a business plan, looking forward both from a capital...
But do you have a business plan? Because all the money is coming from your department. Let's be straight about this. 2.5 billion euro coming from your department to them. Is it open-ended? Is there a blank cheque here for Irish Water in terms of their setup? Because this is the way I see it. 11.25 billion euro worth of assets is transferring to Irish Water. Now, that 11.25 billion euro of assets, I don't know who did the due diligence on all of that. You say, I think you say, each local authority did it. What does that entail? Is it a building? Is it a pipe? Is it a pump? What is it? Who quantify that? So the taxpayer who funded this, because in the year 2007 to 2013, 2.9 billion euro was spent in some way on these assets. And 241 million was spent in relation to water services investment alone in 2013. So all of that there represents taxpayers' money, 11.25 billion. They bought these assets. Now, if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. That's the way I see it. Then there's a further 2.5 billion euro on top of that in relation to the funding from 2014, 15 and 16. So that's 13.75 billion euro of assets being transferred directly into a company. Now, as I understand it, and after that the corporate knowledge, which is worth something in commercial terms, is also being transferred into this company. So how much did you factor into for that built-up knowledge of all of this water system when you transfer the assets? Is that included in the 11.25 billion, or is that something that is just not quantified at present, or will it be quantified? Now, when you transfer all of that money, or all of those assets rather, into this company, for the pleasure of doing all of that on behalf of the taxpayer, you then charge the taxpayer for the water. Now, this is before we ever get to how they're going to fund the refurbishment or the renewal of all of the assets that they're getting. And from the last discussion that we had here in public accounts, I think it was yourself, Ms. Graham, that told us that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the taxpayer would also be expected to contribute something towards the, I think it was billions of euro that it's going to take to bring all of the assets, the water infrastructure, the pipes, the services and so on, up to scratch. Is that a fact?
The decisions that have been made by government at this stage, Chairman, cover the period to the end of 2016. And they cover the operating subvention and the capital contributions. Other elements within the figures that you've referred to are financing mechanisms, borrowings by Irish Water, which will be repaid. The reality is that we are moving from a historically significantly underfunded water services system, and the first step in that transition from that underfunded system to one that can actually be sustainable and provide the type of infrastructure that we need in an efficient and customer-friendly way is for the period to 2016, and to have an independent assessment through the Commission for Energy Regulation to establish what does it cost to actually run the system properly, and what should the appropriate level of capital investment be. The CER has gone through both of those exercises, and if you like, they are the parameters within which Irish Water will work for the period to the end of 2016. There will be a further regulatory period for 5 years from 2017 to 2021, and that will set the parameters both operationally and capital expenditure-wise for that period. And in preparation for that, that's where the business plan that Irish Water are preparing fits in as a preparatory for that.
So, in relation to the transfer of the knowledge from local authorities across, was that considered? That's the question I asked you.
The transfer of the knowledge from local authorities is being dealt with, I suppose, through the fact that that knowledge continues to be available to the system through the service level agreements that Irish Water has with local authorities. So that knowledge continues to be there as part of the operating environment at a practical level.
And the second question in relation to the possibility that the taxpayer may have to contribute to the upgrading of all of this infrastructure at some stage or other, because that was said at the last PSE hearing.
I think, just going back to what I was saying earlier, if you look at the funding of future capital investment, we are seeing for the period to 2016 and most likely for a number of years afterwards continued public investment, but on a declining basis, with private investment coming in to substitute for it. So there will be a declining amount of public investment.
Will that be a declining amount from billions, or will it be a declining amount from millions?
Well, there are two elements to it, Chairman. One is the operating cost element, and the other is the capital contribution.
No, the capital. This whole venture was put into place because it was to be off balance sheet and the only way to raise money to put into the infrastructure and provision of water services. And I'm asking you, is it the plan of the department or envisaged by the department that this new company will raise all of the money on the markets, or is it your expectation that you will have to continue to finance that capital input from taxpayers' money?
The clear expectation is that we will get where Irish Water will be able to finance.
But while you're getting to that point, do you think that you will be funding some of this infrastructure out of taxpayers' money? I'm just asking a straight
Well,
question.
absolutely, and I appreciate
Vincent Brown would say yes or no will do.
appreciate that, Chairman. But unfortunately, I have to explain it to you in terms of the system that's in place. What has been determined at this stage through the Commission for Energy Regulation Assessment is for the period to the end of 2016. So all I can say to you definitively at this stage is that yes, there is a capital contribution going in for 2015 and 2016. Thereafter, it will be subject to another review by the Commission for Energy Regulation. I would expect that as part of that process, there will be a need for a continuing public investment for a period of time, declining, while Irish Water's establishment completes and it can raise money on the markets.
So there will be investment by the taxpayer
For a period.
after 2016
But
in the upgrading of the infrastructure.
There will, but I suppose the
But that
crucial...
hasn't been quantified yet.
But the crucial issue, I suppose, Chairman, not to forget in this is that it will be a contribution towards what will be a much larger capital programme.
So if the capital programme for it was €7 billion, just let's say I've heard that figure mentioned, then the taxpayer might pay half at 3.5 billion or something like that.
I think the overall capital programme for 2017 to 2022, I mean, we'd be talking something between 5 and 6 billion. I would certainly not be envisaging that the public element of that will be a majority. What I'm saying is it will decline.
I know.
It will decline over time.
At the rate of 50% or will it decline at a rate of into nothing?
I mean, I'm kind of speaking in the realm of hypothesis.
That's because you know business plan.
Well, no, there is a very clear business plan, Chairman, for the period to 2016 within what has been set by the regulator.
Do you know if you went into the credit union or to a bank and told me the business plan of the 2016 and you asked them for a loan, they wouldn't give it to you? And yet we're giving a loan of taxpayers' money, or sorry, we're giving away taxpayers' money to a huge entity that has gobbled up money so far in terms of consultants' reports and payments that there's huge questions about in terms of its efficiency. And yet, today, as we look to 2016 and beyond, there is no definite certainty of where we're going with this. And all the talk about CER and New Era and everything else doesn't clarify the matter sufficiently enough for the taxpayer to understand where he or she is going or what is being committed to. Given the sort of financial mystery tour that we've been on in relation to the funding of Irish Water, where the money comes from and how it's accounted for and all the rest of it, and the comments made by your Secretary General, Mr. Watt, that maybe there could be a role in the general accountability of this money through the Public Accounts Committee. He wrote and said something to that effect, and he saw merit in it. I wonder, would you ask him to maybe have a look at that and develop it a little bit more in the light of the conversation that we've had this morning in relation to the various funds that are going into Irish Water? Because if he sees merit in it, there might be a point of that section within your department looking at this to determine how best we might bring forward a plan to give us an input into it. Asking Mr. Heffernan that he would look at formalising that informal basis. I can't do it here as chairman of the committee because I'm told it's outside the remit and it's in legislation and so on. Mr. Watt sees the merit of it. I think most people looking at this debate this morning would see the merit of it. And I'm simply asking of somebody within the system of management of public funds in this country that the suggestion made by Mr. Watt would be at least developed to the point where it's found unworkable or a certain input can be made, establish what that is, and then let us work on it. Because quite frankly, what we have heard here this morning, and it's none of your fault, it's all in legislation, it's how you do your business and all the rest of it, it's just been, it is difficult to understand and to support the notion of how all of this taxpayers' money from various pots of money gets into Irish Water. And all I'm asking is, would you ask? When you're on a radio programme, whether it's local or national, one of the things that unnerves you a little bit is when the presenter says to you, oh, by the way, I have this text message that's just come in. Now, we're like a radio programme here, or television, whatever, because they text in. And this fella says, oh, I see, he said, they're not potholes anymore. He was talking about the water tax. He pays his road tax. So he says, they're not water holes anymore, they're water reservoirs. Brilliant. So, there you go, for what it's worth. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, and that's not to trivialise the issue, that is a serious issue. The committee then agreed to dispose of Chapter 6, the Land Aggregation Scheme, and Chapter 7, matters arising from Audit of 425, Environment, Community, Local Government, in relation to water services.
No way.
Right.
We're waiting for information to come, and not that of any, but I'd like to see the colour of the information before, and then we can sign off in a minute at a future date.
That's agreed. So the committee stands adjourned until Thursday, the 12th of February 2015 at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much.